So as I mentioned, and as you can see, we are very lucky this morning or this afternoon to have with us Mr. Kofi Appenteng, the President and CEO of the Africa America Institute, and also a Legatum Advisory Board member. And we also have Felicia Appenteng. She is the chair of the IE Africa Center and managing director of the IE Fund, as well as a trustee at Wesleyan University. Their bios are available on Canvas, and I will send them around. They have very interesting experiences. And Dina is going to moderate a conversation with our guests today. Dina, I will let you take it from here.
I'm really excited to be moderating this particular conversation, which is focused on narrative and Africa and what is the African narrative with both Kofi and Felicia. And in case some of you didn't guess, they are father and daughter, but very dear, close friends of mine. And Kofi has been a mentor of mine for a very long time. And I've been collaborating with Felicia for a very long time. I consider them family, colleagues, friends, and I hope that all of you will start doing the same. They will become familiar faces throughout your fellowship. I would ask all of you throughout our conversation to write down your thoughts, questions that pop into your mind. I am going to ask Kofi and Felicia a series of questions, and then I will open it up for a general discussion amongst all of us to really discuss your own thoughts around Africa and where Africa is today. So with that, Kofi, I really wanted to start with you. And I was hoping that you could talk about, I did choose a number, but you can go less, you can go more, but I was hoping you could identify 3 critical myths that you feel need to be dispelled about Africa.
Only 3, okay.
I mean, you could do more, you can do less, yeah. It's really up to you.
No. So first of all, it's a real pleasure to be with this inaugural cohort of Foundry Fellows, and I've enjoyed reading about you and listening to you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing and being with you on this journey during the fellowship and hopefully beyond. So I think where I would start is that I think there's this sense that Africa is this kind of peripheral, exotic place that kind of joined the modern world during colonialism and periods of kind of European domination. But when you look at the arc of human history, Africa was there at the beginning, was there in the middle, and is, I think, here very present today. And it's not just Africans on the continent, it's the global, worldwide diaspora. So this sense of not being central in the human story is, I think, a big misconception. I think that I think there's a misperception also about the level of diversity on the African continent. And just how interesting and full and nuanced the stories are, the people are, the cultures are, the innovation, etc. And the third is, I don't think people recognize how much innovation has come from Africa. So I'll stop there.
It's a great place probably for Felicia to pick up. And Felicia, you and I, we talk about this all the time. We talk about it late at night, early in the morning, in the middle of the day, all of our frustrations around the narrative that is often put out in the world about Africa. And you often say something that I love, to quote you for, which is that you talk about Africa as a place and a people that have been integral to shaping the world as it exists today, which is what Kofi was talking about in his first myth, I believe. But that's really not what people talk about when they think about Africa. Can you, from your perspective, break that down a little bit more for the fellows and your thinking around how the narrative of Africa was taken away, and how Africa actually did in fact shape the world as it exists today?
Yeah, thank you so much. And yes, I mean, this is certainly one of my favorite questions to answer and to talk about. I will try to keep it to three. I may not succeed. My father is more concise than I am. So, you know, I think that the first one that's sort of my favorite is democracy, right? So there is this myth that, you know, democracy came out of Greece, but what you actually see is that the Greek thinker Solon was sort of given that sort of mantle of first putting together what it would mean to have a government that actually represented the interests of its people. Well, he learned that in Egypt, which had been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. And even more to the point, it was sort of a typical rite of passage for men of the classical world to travel to North Africa to learn the most cutting edge and interesting concepts. And so for me, this is just sort of, you know, it's a really crucial fact I think that we all need to understand, but also I think that this becomes very damaging when we have conversations about political stability as though democracy is a new concept to Africa when it is, you know, in fact not. I would say that from the sphere of mathematics, you have the Ishango bone from a Uganda, which is about 35,000 years old, and I believe it's the oldest sort of full complete listing of prime numbers, which form and shape the technology that we use for platforms like Zoom. So it's something that we use, you know, all of the time. And you know, music is one that I really think is not well enough appreciated. In the sense that when you sort of do a proper analysis of the rhythms that make up jazz, all of those are African in origin. And when you look at that sort of chart, without that African innovation, you have no blues, then you have no rock and roll, then you have no pop, right? So all of these rhythms and all of these, you know, gorgeous concepts all come from Africa in the first place. And then just sort of, you know, so I was going to make it three, but I won't anymore, because one of my favorite ones is when you look at the Dogon people of Mali, their knowledge of the solar system and of astronomy is something that they knew about the Sirius star thousands and thousands of years BC. It took European scientists till the 19th century to figure out the first part of what they were saying. And then about 16 years ago, they actually found that there was a second Sirius star, which the Dogon people of Mali knew. And, you know, there are sort of lots of, you know, ideas which can sound silly, which is that basically that the people of Mali, are aliens, right? Because, you know, of course, it is much more possible that they could get knowledge from aliens than they could just be smarter than the French scientists who were trying to figure their stuff out, right? But I think that actually just becomes really, really pernicious when it comes to science education and to growth. And when we look at what our future looks like as a planet, and then kind of in a broader way in a universe, it is that kind of knowledge that we all need to be sharing together.
So just a follow-up question to both of you, maybe a hard question, and I hope you'll answer in an honest fashion. And I'm Egyptian and African, but I'm also Muslim. So I also very much connect to the idea that so much innovation happened during the peak of the Muslim civilization that has been forgotten and never spoken about since. But to what extent, why is that narrative, this very powerful narrative, why has it disappeared? And where are the people of Africa in this equation? Why have we not claimed back these amazing components of our history?
I mean, so I work for a Spanish university. So Spain has been obviously the recipient of lots of different types of innovation in math and science that came from the height of the Muslim rule, which they don't always love to talk about or really characterize in that way. But I mean, I think that, and so there are two answers to your question, no, which is quite tough. And I think that the first is that it is just that when you're creating a system of domination, you have to actually erase and minimize the contributions of other people. Otherwise, your ideas don't really hold up anymore. So if we were to look at world history as being this sort of, glorious conversation between people of, different types of experiences and of understandings, then one group or not being dominant really just doesn't really tend to hold water anymore. And I think that this is, especially pernicious because when if you don't see yourself in the world around you, then feeling as though you have the right and the role to change it becomes kind of impossible, right? So I think that we are all still dealing with that in some pretty complicated ways, but that's my guess.
Yeah. Kofi, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that narrative, building narratives and sharing them is a very, very powerful tool. And I think certainly in the US, where I've been mostly living since 1977, when you look at the education system and what it focuses on, what it tests, what it values, it's really designed to reinforce very powerful narratives about overall supremacy of what we'll call kind of Western civilization. And as Felicia mentioned, there's actually been a very focused effort on erasure of other histories. So I think that's why this situation exists the way it is today. There have been, there's continuing pushback, and I think it's building to some of these things. And it's been periodic. I mean, if you go back to the late 1940s in the US, you read W.B. Du Bois, for example, who thought that the time was now clear how badly Western civilization had failed right after the Second World War. The amount of destruction, the lives lost, and the economies of so many countries that were just destroyed, right, during that period of time. He wrote a book where he talked about that and said it's very, very clear now that what we've been fed is not true. But I don't think a lot of people read that book, right? And now I think you're seeing there's been a huge change in the academy, which I'm sure you've seen at MIT, with in the kind of beginning really in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. More and more women and people of color have joined the academy and have been doing a lot of original work. They focused on topics of interest to them and relevant to them. And they found just how poor the scholarship was in certain areas. So just take classics, which right now a lot of kind of more traditional, meaning kind of modern European-based thinking that, and I think of the U.S. as being part of that, really had this image of the white men who came up with all these things. Like Felicia was talking about, just, the facts are very different. So, so I think that these things do take time, but now that there are different people who are doing the original research and are writing the real books, the Academy in many areas is really being taken over now by these new voices. And I think it's going to lead to, and has already led to, some changing narratives. A lot of the information Felicia talked about was almost impossible to find. Right now, Felicia can find it very, very easily, right, and check that it's peer reviewed and it's really solid. And you look at the faculty at MIT, what it was 30 years ago, what it is today. Look who the stars are, right, today versus even 15 years ago. I think it's really changing, but we obviously have a long way to go.
Yeah, and so does MIT. We all have a long way to go. And I think, Felicia, just one last follow-up question, and then we'll transition to another topic. You talk a lot about how, and I bring up this question because we don't really think about it, how Africans, and especially Afro-descendants, have really helped shape and define what freedom looks like. I really wanted you to talk to the fellows a little bit about why you think this is significant in transforming or creating a new narrative about Africa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, essentially two elements to that. The first is dialogue. Second is architecture. So, when you look at the generations of freedom fighters in African countries who, came into power, made some enormous and meaningful changes, those ideas were happening in conversations with civil rights leaders from the US and from Latin America. So it is not as though that there were two movements. There was, there's sort of one long struggle for liberation with meaningful chapters. And I think that into that knowledge, and this kind of comes to the point of the architecture. If what you most want to do is really to dismantle and break down a system that is dysfunctional, you have to center the people that understand the intersectional oppression that they are experiencing. So people that are the most at the bottom are going to best understand how things work. And that is why when you look at everything from economic justice to gender justice to LGBTQI movements, all of these have been, led by Africans and by Afro-descendants, because they really understand this system in a new and in a unique way, which I think is not only something that is really beautiful and thoughtful, but is, I think, a point for all of us to say, okay, so if we want to have a conversation about changing things, whom are we talking to? What kind of questions are we asking them? And really just giving them a voice to shape what that means is just so crucial. But yeah, just, some of I think that it is really possible to think about the fact that some of the people that best understand what it means to be free are those who are the least free. And that is something that you see across the continent and also in the diaspora as well.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to transition a bit to a slightly different topic and bringing it more to where we are today in Africa. And as you both know, both the current demographic and economic growth trends point in the direction that Africa should really start playing a very different kind of role globally. What are your thoughts on the future of Africa in terms of driving economic growth? And what role should the Foundry Fellows be playing in creating this new leadership path for Africa when it comes to economic growth and innovation? I leave it to either one of you to start.
I'm getting the signal from Felicia I should start. So I think that this is a terrific question, and it's one I think that our fellows are more qualified than I am to answer, but I'm gonna share my thoughts, and I'd be really interested in theirs. The demographic trends, I think everybody knows that more and more of the young people in the world are going to be of African descent, and that increasingly our welfare is going to depend on how women fare in this economic journey. My sense is that things are a real mess globally overall. I mean, if you look at it, there's a system that takes credit for, quote unquote, bringing a lot of people out of poverty, but it's unsustainable, right? Like if every country in Africa tried to develop its economy in the same ways as the biggest economies in the world have developed, then it's environmental disaster, right? And at the same time, wealthy nations are struggling to adapt because it's very unpopular, right, to go through wrenching change, especially if there are adverse consequences economically. But at the same time, there is this desire to impose on African countries rules that will reduce how fast those economies can grow, and because of the challenges of sustainability and climate change. So I think that what's really, really critical is how, and this is something I think that Foundry Fellows are going to really get to dig into and explore, and I'm going to really want to learn from what people are coming up with, is how do you create new paradigms, new ecosystems that really result in sustainable, equitable, inclusive growth, right? And I don't think anybody has figured this out in any other region of the world. And it's going to be critical that it happens on the African continent. Otherwise, you really don't see how we get out of the trajectory we're in into a new one. And so, I mean, I think that's really what would be really interesting to explore during this fellowship is how does one do that? It's going to take a lot of innovation, right? And it's going to take sustained capital, right? And it's going to probably take new ways of measuring success, and that come from the value set that fellows bring to their work.
100%. And I do believe that they will be exploring this heavily throughout their fellowship. Felicia, did you want to add anything?
No, that's perfect. Nothing to add for a change.
That is definitely a new thing. Then Kofi, I do want to follow up a little bit, staying on this theme. I think from an innovation perspective, when it comes to Africa, we are seeing a rise in the number specifically of innovation-driven ventures on the continent. We're starting to see unicorns come out, being born out. We saw a unicorn in the fintech space come out of Egypt. We're seeing ventures really grow in scale, some of which belong to the fellows in this group. But we're not seeing an equal increase in risk capital flow to the continent. And that is problematic and will definitely risk the ability of innovation-driven ventures to scale. Why is narrative so important to seeing risk capital flow at a much higher pace to Africa? And what should we be doing differently?
I think this is a quandary that I don't think there's a quick fix to. And I think one of the problems is in actually jumping to the outcome one's looking for, which is risk capital flowing from other places in the world into Africa, when I think that if you look at economies in Africa, the most interesting growth opportunities are intra-African, right? It's that part. It's the part of the world with the least intra-trade. Right? You look at the EU, you look at North America. You know, you look at different South Asia, East Asia. The level of local investment and the growth locally that's fueled by local capital, it's very, very different. And there's a trade issue there too. And so another thing I think is that all our eyes are captured by the unicorns, but they actually play a very small role, I think, overall economically. So Felicia and I were visiting with some folks earlier this year, and I think the statistic they used for Spain was 99% of the economy in Spain is small and medium-sized enterprise. In Ghana, they were estimating over 90%. So there's a lot I think we can learn from that, which is that we've got to really look at what are the impediments for local capital to participate. Once local capital is participating, it's going to end up creating opportunities where global capital has a fear of missing out on what they're seeing happening local and loses its fear, which is born of these destructive narratives which have been developed about just how extraordinary you have to make the opportunity in order to justify the perceived risk. So to me, I'd be really interested to see how Foundry Fellows have thought about this in terms of their own businesses and how they see this ecosystem developing until the local capital is really given a chance to really be fully invested, I think, in the local markets. It's going to be really, you won't see the global. So that's how I kind of think about this. It's that we've got to fix the local issues. When we were in Ghana, shopping is not something I do if I can avoid it. But I was talking with Felicia and some people about some of the local entrepreneurs, and many of them were undersized. They had very good businesses, but they were way undersized because there were so many impediments to them actually participating across borders, right? Let alone in the global market. there was just so many opportunities like that. And I think those are the kinds of things that it'll be really interesting to see the ideas that come from the Foundry Fellows on how we can unleash that.
Well, staying on that thread, I mean, we all know that economic integration in Africa is critical to overall economic growth on the continent. And for that growth to be sustainable, equitable, inclusive, we really do need to address the issue of how we can see more integration and opening up of borders, and specifically from a free trade perspective. Why, and maybe Felicia, you can pick this up, why is it so important to really tackle the issue of integration if we're really going to create the jobs that we need and really build sustainable economies across the continent?
Yeah, I mean, so what I think that you see when you look at the borders that exist between African countries, and then even in between regions, how much those borders were drawn to suit other agendas, which my father can say more about, as opposed to local agendas. And how much of those divides really get in the way of really, really good ideas. So sort of one of my, Dina's, so one of my pet peeves is the whole Sub-Saharan North Africa issue.
Oh, mine too. I'm always denied my African heritage.
Never, you are welcome. So, and it's something that is, in one sense, it's a little crazy making, because if we have all of these really genuine global crises, having borders that are not meaningful gets in the way of really strong and good conversations. And that's where, ideas can happen. And to me, this is a group of people that I think really is poised to have those really complicated and those really meaningful conversations. And I mean, these borders were not drawn for local growth or success. So why should they then be structures that we have to operate under?
Yeah, Dina, if I can just add one quick point. It's a little bit of an anecdote. So there's a historian called Michael Gomez, and he's written many books. One of them was called Reversing Sale, which I'd recommend to everybody. And in it, an illustration, I think, of what Felicia was talking about is, if you look at a medieval map of Africa, you will see cities, inland, trade routes all across the African continent. If you look post-colonial, you will see all of that basically disappear, and all the major population centers are coastal, because they were being set up for extractive uses, and basically the trade routes withered, and the cities internally also withered. And I think it just gives you a sense of what needs to be repaired in order for the continent to be thriving. It was intentionally dismantled because it wasn't that useful during colonization for the colonizers, and it's been too long, and we got to fix that.
100%. So I'm going to open it up for questions from the fellows. So please start preparing your thoughts and questions. But I wanted to, it was not by mistake, it was very intentional that we start the fellowship really talking about Africa, the history of Africa, and narrative. And a narrative that is often used in the world that is not an accurate portrayal of the African continent or the African people. Why is it critical that the Foundry Fellows really spend time thinking about the African narrative? And from your perspective, what is the narrative shift we should really, you've mentioned this a lot, but if you were to put it in one statement, what should the fellows really be thinking about in terms of a narrative shift? And what are some ideas around how they can really push for that as a group collectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple things. So there's, when you look back on world history, there's a way in which Africa is always described as the object of the sentence as opposed to the subject, right? So the object is having something done to it, and the subject is doing something. So I think that every single person in this group is doing something that is really meaningful and important, and that just having that shift from object to subject is just really, really meaningful. And this is something that Toni Morrison, I think, said really well, which is that narrative is radical because it shapes us as we're shaping it. So as you're starting this really amazing program, you have the absolute right to not only tell your own story and that of your community, but also of the group that you're forming and of what you want to accomplish. We do, a lot of this work around narrative just because narrative shapes possibilities. And so when you think about what you want to, accomplish, you should really be really bold in all of those possibilities and not let any old architectures or systems hold you back from really, really great ideas.
Fantastic. I love that. Narrative does in fact shape possibilities. Kofi?
I don't have anything to add to that.
So let me give you the final question then. This is the beginning of the Foundry Fellowship journey. What advice or what piece of wisdom do you have to offer the fellows when it comes to building their own personal narrative and in crafting a collective narrative around entrepreneurship and innovation on the African continent?
I think it's always important to keep purpose right in the center of your mind. Why are you doing? Why is this important? And making sure that you align your what you're doing with your true purpose. There are a lot of institutions that, in my view, don't do that enough. And one of the ways I think that the Foundry Fellows can really set an example that will be really inspirational is to really focus on that purpose and keep on challenging oneself to come closer and closer to that purpose. So that would be the thing I would focus on.
Felicia?
I mean, I don't want to follow that, but yeah, I mean, I think that is, I think that is perfect. And I would say, just a sense of adventure. This is really, really exciting. And, I think that there's a way in which with COVID that sort of all of our systems are sort of a bit off because we have really tough things that are happening around us all the time. But this is a genuinely exciting moment. It's a time to think big and just really to be excited with purpose.
100%. All right, we can go